Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be looking at Parkinson's Law.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It is. And I have a feeling this one might change how we look at work, productivity.
Maybe even just human nature.
Yeah, exactly. Big stuff. And to help us out, we've got excerpts from, well, Parkinson himself.
Straight from the source.
Exactly. His book, Parkinson's Law. And I got to say, this guy, he was brilliant, like really smart.
Yeah, he was.
But he used humor, he used stories.
Really brought it to life.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so memorable, right?
Totally.
Okay, so picture this. You've got an afternoon free, totally free. No deadlines, nothing urgent. What do you do?
Oh, man. Probably finally tackle that hobby project I've been putting off.
Right, or like catch up on some reading. Relax, finally, right?
Exactly.
But what if that free afternoon was dedicated to one task and one task only,
Okay.
sending a single postcard?
Yeah.
Would it still just take a few minutes?
Probably not, knowing myself.
Probably not. And that is Parkinson's Law in a nutshell. Work expands.
To fill the time.
Yes, to fill the time available for its completion. Suddenly, picking the perfect postcard, writing the message, even the trip to the mailbox.
It all becomes this big production.
It does. Totally does.
Okay.
We've all been there, right? Stretching out a task when we've got the time.
Absolutely guilty of that.
But Parkinson doesn't stop there. He goes beyond just our personal procrastination.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. He applies this to, you guessed it,
Let me guess. Bureaucracies.
bureaucracies. The often baffling world of bureaucracies.
Makes sense.
He uses this great example of a shrinking navy. So fewer ships. Logically, you'd think fewer people needed to manage all that, right?
Right.
But what happens?
What happens?
The number of Admiralty officials, it skyrockets.
Wait, what? Really?
Yeah. It makes no sense until you look at it through Parkinson's Law.
Okay, yeah. So is he saying they're, like, deliberately making work for themselves just to stay busy?
It's not always intentional, but he does point to a couple of, really powerful forces at play. First one, and I love this quote, an official wants to multiply subordinates, not rivals.
Oh, that's good.
It's so true, right? It's human nature.
No power move.
It is,
Yeah.
right? Build your little empire, accumulate power. The more people you manage.
The more important you look.
Exactly. But how does that actually translate into more work?
Good question.
This is where the second force comes in. Officials make work for each other,
Uh-huh.
right? So suddenly you've got this explosion of paperwork, committees, meetings.
All to justify their existence.
Exactly. Like, look how busy we are. We're indispensable.
Are so important.
But are they really? So how do we measure this? Is there any way to, quantify bureaucratic growth?
That's a good question.
I mean, it seems so,
Human.
yeah, how do you measure that?
Right. It's so irrational.
It is. But you know what? Parkinson tried to come up with a mathematical formula for it.
Seriously. He took into account, age, desire for promotion, even, the amount of time spent on internal memos.
Wow. Applying math to bureaucracy.
Oh, it's ambitious.
It is. But it also shows how, even though it seems like a simple observation, he really tried to study it rigorously.
He did. He took it seriously, which is, I think, part of why it's resonated so much.
Makes sense.
And it actually leads to another one of those, aha moments that Parkinson's good at, the bicycle shed effect.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of this, but I always get it mixed up.
It's easy to... Can you refresh my memory?
Yes. Okay. So imagine there's a committee, and they're tasked with approving two plans.
Okay.
One, a simple bicycle shed.
Okay.
Two, a complex nuclear reactor.
Got it. Big difference.
Huge. Which one do you think they spend more time on?
Well, logically, the nuclear reactor. Way higher stakes.
You'd think. But Parkinson noticed that often committees get so bogged down
In the little details.
in the bicycle shed, while kind of neglecting or just rushing through the complex issues.
Oh, wow. So it's almost counterintuitive.
It is. Why do you think that happens?
I don't know. Do you think it's, maybe more common in certain types of organizations?
Maybe, really hierarchical organizations, where people are afraid to speak up about the big stuff.
And it feels safer to just, nitpick the small things.
Yes. It's, less risky, you
Yeah.
know? And maybe they feel like they're contributing more when it's something they can grasp.
Yeah. It's easier to have an opinion on, the color of the bicycle shed than, nuclear physics.
Exactly. So it's not always, malice or laziness.
It's just, human nature.
It is. It's this weird mix of fear.
Wanting to feel valuable.
Yeah. But it highlights something really important. Sometimes those big decisions, the ones with real consequences.
They get the least amount of thought.
Yeah. which is kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. It really makes you think twice about, like, how meetings are run, how we prioritize things.
Right, like how do we make sure those bicycle sheds aren't taking up all the oxygen in the room?
That's a good question. I think it starts with just being aware of it, right?
Totally.
And then being more mindful about how we spend our time and energy.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got work expanding to fill time. We've got these little bureaucratic empires and committees getting lost in the weeds.
Quite the picture he's painting.
He is. But wait, there's more. What else did Parkinson uncover about how these organizations and the people in them really work?
Well, this next one's a little more subtle,
Okay.
but just as fascinating. Non-origination.
Non-origination.
Yeah, it's about how truly new ideas.
They don't really happen that often.
Not in these settings.
Right. It's like you come up with this amazing idea.
And then by the time it goes through all the approval,
It's unrecognizable.
totally watered down.
And to explain this, Parkinson uses these terms. I love them. In-laws and outlaws.
Okay, in-laws and outlaws. I'm intrigued.
Okay, so let's say you're the outlaw. You've got this brilliant idea, but going straight to the top of it.
Too risky.
Right. So you subtly share it with someone more senior, but closer to the decision makers. That's the in-law.
Oh, okay, so the in-laws, like your sponsor.
Exactly. They take the idea, maybe tweak it a bit, and then present it as their own.
Classic.
But here's the really interesting part. To avoid it getting rejected outright,
They what?
they might initially present it like they're not totally sold on it,
Really?
like they're arguing against it,
Why would they do that?
so that the higher-ups can step in,
As the heroes.
yes,
Yeah.
and convince the in-law of its merits. And then,
They get to take credit.
exactly, it's like
That's
this,
carefully choreographed.
it is this dance of ego and power dynamics. It's so cynical, but
But it rings true.
it does, right? It's like the idea gets accepted not because it's good, but because of who championed it.
And how it was presented.
Yeah.
What does that tell us?
I think it shows how important it is to create a culture where, people feel comfortable sharing ideas.
Openly.
Yeah, no matter where they come from.
Regardless of rank. Yeah. And it reminds us to look beyond who's presenting an idea and really evaluate it on its own merits.
That's such a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the, personalities, the politics.
And miss the truly good ideas.
Totally. And you know what? This leads to another observation that Parkinson made.
Okay, lay it on me.
Okay, so it's about the size of an expenditure and the amount of time spent discussing it.
Interesting. There's a connection there.
There is. He calls it the point of vanishing interest.
The point of vanishing interest. All right, I'm hooked.
So imagine you're on committee, you're discussing a budget, a tiny expense, it gets barely a glance, right?
Probably.
But then a massive proposal, like billions of dollars.
This can be overwhelming, too.
It is. People's kind of shut down. Like, it's beyond my understanding.
Beyond my control.
Yes. But there's this sweet spot in the middle.
The Goldilocks zone.
Yes, where the amount matters, but it's not so huge that it becomes this abstract thing.
Right, so it's big enough to care about.
Yes. And Parkinson says this is where you get the most scrutiny, the most debate.
Interesting.
Like, he used the example of a committee discussing a nuclear reactor.
The same one that breezed through approval while they were arguing about the bicycle shed?
Yes. It's like our brains can't handle things that are either too small.
Or too large.
We need that just right size to really engage.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How our perception of scale, really affects our decision-making.
It does. It makes you wonder how many opportunities we miss because we're either too dismissive
or too intimidated.
It's a great question to keep in mind.
And honestly, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
I know, right?
There's so much more to Parkinson's work.
We've just scratched the surface.
We've just begun to see the world through his eyes.
But maybe we should take a little pause here.
Catch our breath.
Let everything sink in. When we come back, we're going to dive even deeper into Parkinson's law and how it can help us all navigate work and life.
I'm ready for it.
Me too. Stay tuned. Back again for more Parkinson's law.
I feel like we're already starting to see the world a little differently.
Right, like noticing these patterns everywhere.
Everywhere. And before the break, we were talking about that Goldilocks zone of decision-making.
Oh yeah, how we scrutinize expenses that are not too small, not too big.
But sometimes those big decisions,
They're so overwhelming.
they are, and we avoid thinking about them too deeply, which is kind of scary.
Definitely. And it ties into another thing Parkinson talks about, the inefficiency of large organizations.
Yeah. We've all experienced that.
He argues that, as institutions grow, they become more focused on their internal processes.
Than on what they're actually supposed to be doing.
Yeah, Like a machine obsessed with its own gears instead of what it produces?
It's like too many cooks spoil the broth, but instead it's too many officials spoil the mission.
Uh-huh. Exactly. More people, more departments, you'd think more would get done.
But Parkinson says the opposite happens.
Really?
Yeah, communication breaks down, decisions take forever, and everyone's busy, but is anything actually being achieved?
It's like activity becomes a substitute for results.
Oh, that's good. And he even suggests there's a point where an organization gets so big.
It can't make any meaningful decisions at all.
Wow. Paralyzed by bureaucracy.
It's a bit bleak.
It is. But is there any way to, like, combat this?
There's gotta be, right? We know about these patterns.
We can find ways to break them.
Exactly. So what's the antidote to, like, bureaucratic paralysis?
Well, awareness is the first step. Understanding how these dynamics work.
So we can be more vigilant about, like, streamlining things, communicating clearly.
And making sure everyone's aligned on the goals.
Not just being busy.
Right. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Love that. Okay, so work smarter, not harder. Got it.
But then he goes on to talk about something kind of paradoxical, the power of inefficiency.
Wait, what? How can inefficiency be a good thing?
Well, think about a small startup.
Okay.
They might not have the resources or, like, the polished processes of a big company,
Right, they're scrappy.
but they have that, like, make it happen energy.
They're forced to be resourceful.
Prioritize what matters.
I get it. Have you ever worked somewhere like that?
Totally. When I was first starting out, our team was tiny, but we got so much done.
Because you had to wear multiple hats.
Exactly. No room for bureaucracy.
And there's a certain agility that comes from that, right? Limited resources, a sense of urgency.
Now, contrast that with a large established organization.
They have all the resources, but they can get complacent.
Risk averse. Stuck in their ways.
Victims of their own success.
So a little bit of healthy inefficiency.
Keeps you on your toes.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, you know. Efficiency versus agility, structure versus flexibility.
So maybe bigger isn't always better.
And maybe maintaining a bit of that startup spirit, even in a big organization.
Is key to staying innovative.
It all comes back to not getting too internally focused, not losing sight of the real goals.
Right. It's not just about being efficient, it's about being effective.
And a little bit of that scrappy energy can go a long way.
It can. Okay, so we've got work expanding to fill time, the dangers of too much bureaucracy, the power of inefficiency. What else? What other insights did Parkinson have about how people act in these organizations?
Oh, his observations about committees, those are spot on.
Oh, committees. Everyone loves a good committee.
Right. He even dedicated a whole chapter to it.
He called it comatology.
Comatology. I love that. He breaks down how they can either work really well
Or be a total disaster.
and I'm sure we've all experienced that.
Oh, yeah. Trapped in a pointless meeting that goes on forever, accomplishing nothing.
So what are some of the pitfalls?
Well, he noticed that committees tend to grow in size.
Even when their purpose is less clear.
More people, more opinions.
More chances for things to get bogged down.
Right. A recipe for inefficiency.
And then there's what he calls the law of triviality.
When they spend way too much time on little details.
While important stuff gets rushed through or ignored.
Wait a minute, isn't that the bicycle shed effect all over again?
It is. It seems like no matter how big the group,
We get fixated on the easy stuff.
even if it's not that important.
And he had another interesting observation about committees. He said that the most influential members,
Aren't always the most knowledgeable.
really, it's not about expertise.
He noticed it often comes down to, like, who's best at navigating the group dynamics.
The people who are persuasive,
Yeah.
good at building alliances.
Even if they don't know much about the topic.
So it's about politics and persuasion, not merit.
Yeah. It can be a bit disheartening.
It is. But at least if we know about it,
You can try to be more aware of it.
right, recognizing the patterns, the potential pitfalls,
And using that knowledge to navigate these situations better.
makes sense. So Parkinson's on committees, it's both funny and a little depressing.
But ultimately valuable.
Yeah, because it helps us understand how they really work.
Or don't work.
Exactly.
Oh.
Okay, so we've covered work expanding to fill time, bureaucracy, inefficiency, comatology. What else? What other insights does Parkinson offer about this crazy world of work?
Well, this one might be his most intriguing observation. He calls it intelligence.
Intelligence, what's that? Sounds made up.
It is a word he made up. It's about this phenomenon. I'm sure we've all seen it.
What is it?
People rising to positions of authority, even though,
They're not competent.
yes, incompetent people climbing the ladder.
Wow, that's scary. How does that even happen?
He suggests a few factors. One is that organizations often promote based on seniority or conformity.
Not actual ability.
Like a reward for just being there, not rocking the boat.
Even if you're not good at your job.
It's like the Peter Principle.
Yeah.
People rising to their level of incompetence.
Right. But it can't just be about time served, can it?
No, it's more than that. He also talks about what he calls the halo effect.
Okay, the halo effect. Tell me more.
It's where people are judged based on their appearance, their social skills, how they present themselves.
About their actual knowledge.
Image over substance.
That's dangerous.
And he suggested that these intelligent individuals often surround themselves with equally incompetent people.
Oh, no. Creating this echo chamber.
Where mediocrity reigns supreme.
It's a downward spiral. But how do we break out of it? How do we get back to promoting competence?
I think that's where critical thinking comes in. We can't just accept things at face value.
We have to question things, challenge authority.
Look for evidence. Don't be swayed by appearances or smooth talk.
Right, it's about looking beyond the surface.
Evaluating if someone really has the skills to lead.
So Parkinson's work, it's not just a description of how things are.
It's a call to action.
It is. It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to think critically.
To hold ourselves and others accountable.
Wow. This has been really thought-provoking.
It has.
Parkinson's law is so insightful, but it's also, like, funny and relatable.
And it really makes you think.
It does. But what does it all mean, practically speaking? How can we use all this in our own lives and careers?
That's a great question, and it's what we're going to dive into next.
I can't wait. This is the kind of conversation that makes you want to go out and change the world.
Or at least change the way we work.
Totally. So let's take a short pause to let everything sink in, and when we come back, we'll explore how we can apply Parkinson's law to become more effective, productive, and engaged in everything we do.
Sounds good.
Stay with us. Welcome back. We've uncovered some pretty fascinating and maybe even a little unsettling truths about work and organizations with Parkinson's law. But it's not all bad news, right?
Not at all. It's not about getting overwhelmed or cynical. It's about giving us the power to make better choices, both in our own work and in the organizations we're a part of.
Right. And before the break, we were talking about intelligence.
Ah, yes. The incompetent climbing the ladder.
Which is, honestly, a little terrifying to think about.
It is. But like you said, knowledge is power, right? Understanding it helps us be more discerning, like when we're evaluating leaders.
And even how we develop our own leadership skills, too.
Exactly. So let's get practical. We've explored all these observations, but how can we actually use Parkinson's law in our own lives and careers? What are the takeaways?
Like, give us the actionable stuff.
Okay, so first and foremost, awareness is key. We've got to recognize that work expands to fill the time we give it. So instead of letting a task drag on forever, we need to set clear deadlines.
Break things down into smaller chunks.
Exactly. Be intentional with our time and energy, not let them get sucked into that, black hole of never-ending to-dos.
I like that, the black hole of to-dos. Because it's so true. Have you ever noticed how much you can get done when you're under a tight deadline?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes that pressure actually helps us focus.
It does. It's like you're procrastinating on a project, and then suddenly it's the night before it's due, and boom, you get this burst of energy and you get it done.
Maybe we need to create our own deadlines more often, even when they're not externally imposed.
I think so, yeah. It's like a little trick we can play on ourselves.
And then when it comes to making decisions, remember the bicycle shed effect.
Oh, yeah. Don't get lost in the weeds.
Exactly. Ask yourself, am I focusing on what really matters, or am I just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic?
Oh, I love that analogy because it's so true. Prioritize. Be vigilant about those little things that tempt us but aren't really important.
Protect your time and attention.
Okay, so what about when we're stuck in those big organizations? Parkinson talked about all those potential bureaucratic traps, the endless meetings, communication breakdowns, things moving super slow. How do we deal with that?
Well, first, don't be afraid to question how things are done. Just because it's always been done a certain way
doesn't mean it's the right way.
Exactly. Look for ways to streamline things, cut out unnecessary steps, make things flow better.
Be a champion for efficiency.
And remember, sometimes a little bit of healthy inefficiency can be a good thing, even in a big organization. Don't be scared to experiment, try new things, break the mold.
So find that balance, right? Structure and flexibility. Tried and true methods and new ideas.
And speaking of new ideas, how do we avoid that non-origination thing where good ideas get stifled?
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Well, I think it starts with creating a culture of openness. Encourage people to speak up, share their thoughts, regardless of their position.
Focus on the merit of the idea, not who said it.
Exactly. Let the best ideas win.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about leadership? How do we use Parkinson's law to be better leaders ourselves or to recognize good leaders?
Well, remember intelligence. Don't promote based just on seniority or conformity. Look for real competence, people with the skills and temperament to lead well.
And if you're the leader, build a team of capable people,
Not just yes men. Surround yourself with people who challenge you.
people who bring different perspectives.
You can see things from different angles.
Build a team that's stronger together. And finally, self-awareness. How can we use Parkinson's law to understand our own tendencies, make better choices?
I think it's about noticing those moments, when work is expanding to fill the time we give it, or when we're getting lost in the details,
It's about being honest with ourselves about our biases, our habits.
and then making a conscious effort to change them.
Like having this little internal observer always checking in and asking, am I really being effective or am I just going through the motions?
Am I focusing on what matters or getting distracted?
I love that because it's that self-reflection, that willingness to question ourselves that helps us break those patterns and become more intentional.
More effective people.
And Parkinson's law, it's not just a tool for understanding the world. It's also a mirror, reflecting our own choices.
It reminds us that even though things can be complex and systems can be flawed, we still have the power to make choices.
To be agents of change, to strive for excellence.
It's not about having all the answers, but about being willing to learn and grow.
And that's what makes Parkinson's work so relevant, so timeless. It's not just about work, it's about understanding ourselves.
Human nature.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've laughed, we've cringed, we've had those light bulb moments.
We've learned a lot.
We have. And I think we've come away with a better understanding of ourselves, how things work, and how to navigate it all.
It's not about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Making conscious choices, challenging the status quo, striving for excellence.
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Parkinson's law.
We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll take these insights with you as you go about your work, your relationships, your own personal growth.
Remember, awareness is the first step to change.
And by understanding these principles of human behavior and organizations, we can all be more effective, more productive, more fulfilled.
Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to exploring more fascinating topics with you in our next deep dive.
Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, keep pushing boundaries.